Since the beginning of recorded history, one tradition that has always been around in various continents, cultures, and religions is that of spiritual possession and exorcism. Although the exorcism rites vary from place to place, there is one thing that is the same all over, and that is the idea that powerful spirits or other entities have the ability to reach out and take over our bodies. Maybe it's some people's way of trying to make an excuse for the terrible acts some are capable of committing. One case of supposed possession, and one that was particularly violent, happened in 1974 when a usually peaceful family man was said to have become possessed by many demonic entities and went on to commit a barbaric murder that would shock the whole nation. The quiet town of Ossett, near West Yorkshire, doesn't seem the kind of place where a sensational, gruesome murder and talk of exorcism would happen. Yet it's here, in this peaceful town, where the sinister story begins. In 1974, 31-year-old Michael Taylor, his wife Christine, their 5 children and their little dog called Ossett their home. Their family was thought to be mostly cheerful and happy, and their neighbors got on well with them. Michael was described as being kind, mild-mannered, and a loving father and husband, although he was sometimes prone to minor bouts of depression due to a severe back injury that had left him in chronic pain and the inability to find long-term employment. Apart from the problems with his back, there was no indication that anything was wrong or unusual in the Taylor household. And those who passed by their house would often hear the sound of laughter and joy coming from the family. They were usually seen taking walks together, waving at those they knew. The whole family looked like the perfect family. The kids would be happily skipping ahead of their parents with the little dog. Michael and Christine would be holding hands or have their arms around each other. Basically, everything looked perfect for them. Ossett had a population that was highly religious, with most regularly attending the local church. The Taylors had never been particularly devout, and they mostly skipped the church services held near where they lived. It was this lack of interest in religion that made a friend of theirs, Barbara Wardman, introduce them to a church group called the Christian Fellowship Group, which was led by 21-year-old Marie Robinson. The previously non-religious Michael began to attend regular meetings with the group. He got to know their teachings and quickly fell under the spell of the charming preacher Marie. In fact, it soon became clear that Michael had become rather infatuated with the young woman, and he began to spend an inappropriate amount of time with her, attending more and more meetings and gatherings of the group. One of the regular services Marie conducted was, in her words, to use the power of God to exorcise people of their sins. The whole congregation, including Michael, would join in and speak in tongues. He then began to engage in private rituals with Marie, in which both her and Michael would stay up all night, making the sign of the cross at each other in order to ward off what they believed to be the evil power of the moon. Since joining the fellowship group, Michael's attitude at home began to change. He was more irritable, argumentative, and miserable towards his family, and he was spending less and less time with them. This was totally unlike the easygoing, peaceful way Michael had once been, and it was assumed that the church group was somehow having a negative influence on him. It got to the point where Michael's increasingly strange beliefs, uncharacteristic erratic behavior, bad attitude, and infatuation with Mary Robinson became quite obvious to those around him, most of all by his wife. During one congregation, Christine suddenly decided to confront Michael about his relationship with the preacher and accused him of being unfaithful. It was at this point where his behavior would take a turn for the worse. Michael is reported to have felt an evil influence cast a shadow over him, and then, compelled by this force, turned his sudden fury on Marie, lashing out at her verbally and physically to the point where several other churchgoers had to physically restrain him before he seriously hurt someone. Marie herself would later testify to what happened. She said, "I suddenly glanced at Mike and his whole features changed. He looked almost bestial. He kept looking at me and there was a really wild look in his eyes. I started screaming at him out of fear. I started to speak in tongues. Mike also screamed at me in tongues. I felt I was on the verge of death, then came to my senses. I knew that only the name of Jesus would save me, and I just started saying over and over again, Jesus. When Chris heard me calling on the name of Jesus, she started saying it too, and I believe firmly that it was only by calling on his name that I was not killed. Before I carry on, I just want to explain about speaking in tongues, for those who don't know what this is. Speaking in tongues is a practice where a person speaks words that are incomprehensible and are often a language the speaker doesn't know. In some religions, such as Christianity, speaking in tongues is considered a divine language, and God has given the ability to speak this language as a spiritual gift to Christians. In other religions, it's believed speaking in tongues is the work of the devil, and those who speak it are being manipulated by some kind of demon. So, Michael would claim later to have no memory of the incident. Despite this frightening, violent outburst, the following day Michael received full forgiveness from Marie and a church absolution for what had happened. However, no one would really ever forget it, and a close eye was kept on Michael from then on. It became apparent that his deteriorating, out-of-character behavior showed no signs of changing. In fact, it got worse as time went on. He seemed to be losing his sanity. Several local ministers were informed of what was going on. Instead of speaking to the Taylor family, telling them to get medical help straight away, they quickly jumped to the conclusion that he might be under the influence of demonic forces. The local vicar said an exorcism should be performed as quickly as possible. Two ministers, by the names of Father Peter Vincent and Reverend Raymond Smith, were brought in to carry out the rites. The date and time for the exorcism was set for midnight on the 5th October 1974 at St. Thomas Church in nearby Barnsley, and on that night, the two ministers began a ritual which would prove to be a harrowing affair that would last throughout the night and well into the next morning. As soon as the exorcism began, Michael went into uncontrollable convulsions, with bouts of spitting, scratching, and biting. This required him to be forcefully tied to the floor. Over the next 8 hours, Michael was subjected to having crucifixes shoved into his mouth, being doused with holy water, and being forced to confess his sins. All the while, he was growling and snapping at anyone who came near him. The priests in charge of the exorcism claimed that there were around 40 demons inhabiting Michael's body, including those representative of incest, bestiality, blasphemy, lewdness, heresy, and carnal knowledge. These alleged demons did not go easily, each one having to be reportedly dragged out kicking and screaming. By 8 a.m. on the 6th of October, the clergy carrying out the exorcism were exhausted and could no longer continue. It was decided that the exorcism would have to be finished at a later time, although they claimed that 3 demons, those of insanity, anger, and murder, were still stubbornly digging their claws into Michael and had not been successfully removed yet. One witness to the terrifying exorcism, in fact, it was Reverend Raymond Smith's wife, Margaret Smith, claimed she had received a warning in her mind that she believed was from God, which said that the demon of murder was going to escape and kill Christine. She pleaded with the men to complete the exorcism, but instead they told Michael and Christine to go home and rest and prepare for the next round, which was to be performed the following day. Thankfully, the couple's children had been sent to their grandparents for a few nights, so would not witness, or worse, be involved in what was to happen next. Whether there were really demons still infesting Michael's body or not, what would follow was nothing short of pure evil and total insanity. At 10 a.m., just 2 hours after they had been sent home from the church, Michael brutally attacked and killed his wife Christine in their home in an incredibly ferocious manner, strangling her to death with his bare hands, gouging out her eyes, tearing out her tongue, and ripping most of her face off in a terrible display of violence. When he was finished with his wife, he grabbed the family dog and slaughtered him as well, tearing him limb from limb. Michael made a grim sight as he left his home and wandered into the street, naked and covered in blood. He was stumbling around aimlessly and maniacally shouting, "It's the blood of Satan," over and over again. This was the state in which a passing patrol car found him. And soon after, they would find the badly mutilated bodies of Christine Taylor and their dog. Such a sensational crime, along with its bizarre background of demonic possession and exorcisms, took the normally quiet and peaceful town by storm, creating a media frenzy and drawing an intense amount of interest to the following trial. The crime was so weird and brutal, as were the events leading up to it, that the trial opened with the prosecution barrister, Jeffrey Baker QC, telling the jury that the evidence they are about to witness will make it difficult to believe they are not back in the Middle Ages. Michael would state during his testimony that he had no recollection of the actual killing, that he had been under the control of evil supernatural forces, and that he had suspected that his wife had also been possessed by demons. During the proceedings, it was pointed out that the Christian Fellowship group had been more like a fanatical cult, influencing Michael with potent mind control. This made any mental health issues he already had much, much worse. Blame was also directly leveled at the exorcism itself, with the defense claiming that the ritual had fed off the warped ideals, beliefs, and religious passion Michael had picked up from the group. The negative influences they had on him had taken its toll on an already wary, sleep-deprived, mentally disturbed man, pushing him over the edge into the realms of madness and murder. One of the barristers, Mr. Ognall QC, made a statement during the trial, illustrating the general feeling of the church's responsibility in the horrific crime. He said, "I am aware that it is generally regarded as improper for an advocate to express any personal feelings or opinions about the case in which he is engaged. I am afraid I find it quite impossible to observe such constraints in this case. Let those who truly are responsible for this killing stand up. We submit that Taylor is a mere cipher. The real guilt lies elsewhere. Religion is the key. Those who have been referred to in the evidence, and those clerics in particular, should be with him in this building, and each day he is incarcerated in Broadmoor, and not least on the day he must endure the bitter reunion with his 5 motherless children." In the end, Michael was found not guilty by reasons of insanity and was seen to be both clinically and legally insane. He was sent to Broadmoor Secure Hospital for the criminally insane. He would remain there for 2 years, followed by another 2-year sentence at Bradford Royal Infirmary before being released back into the world. The aftermath of the trial brought about a great amount of public outcry over the use of exorcisms within the church, and it became the last recorded exorcism to be carried out by the Anglican Church. Throughout the trial, and in the following years, the chief vicar who had been in charge of the exorcism, Peter Vincent, continued to adamantly insist that Michael had indeed been inhabited by demons, and that it had been an authentic case of true demonic possession. He said, "I am quite convinced God will bring good out of this in his own way, however tragic it was at the time." When the psychiatrist said this crime would not have been committed if an exorcism had not been performed, that was a very strange thing to say. People will draw their own conclusions. After his trial and sentence, Michael would continue to display odd behavior, as well as falling into deep depression and try to take his own life a total of 4 times over the years. In July 2005, Michael Taylor would be in the news again when he was arrested for harassing an underage girl. During this trial, his previous charges were deemed to have no bearing on the current case. He showed a low to medium risk of reoffending, and this, plus his lack of any previous convictions for harassment crimes, led to a light sentence of a 3-year stint of community service and further psychiatric treatment. No one knows where Michael Taylor is now, or even if he is still alive. It was believed that he did return to Osset after his release from hospital. Whether he returned after his second offense is unknown. His children have been kept out of the news, thankfully, and no one knows who they are or where they are. Now, when Father Peter Vincent gave a statement and said he found it strange that the court psychiatrist said the crime would not have been committed if the exorcism had not been performed, it seems he couldn't understand this statement, that he felt the exorcism had nothing to do with the murder. He felt he had done nothing wrong. Well, I understand exactly what the psychiatrist meant. If Michael had been sectioned, if someone had sought medical help the minute his behavior had gotten worse, then it more than likely wouldn't have resulted in such a tragedy. He was brainwashed by Marie Robinson and her fellowship group. The clergymen jumped straight in and shouted demonic possession. Not one word of medical help was mentioned. Michael Taylor was in a fragile state. It was drummed into him that he was full of demonic creatures who were making him feel this way. To him, that was the extent of things. They were men of God, so must be telling the truth. We don't know what went on in the house after him and Christine got home that morning. Something could have happened that made him truly snap. Father Vincent's wife mentioned in church in front of him that he still had the demon of murder in him, and he was going to kill his wife. What if he thought it was something he had to do to get rid of the demon? What he did was truly awful, and the agony his wife and his little dog must have gone through is just unthinkable. In my opinion, his sentence was way too short. He should have been kept in the secure hospital for much longer to make sure he was able to be safe around the public. Maybe keeping him inside until the day he died would have been a better option. But then again, if he had gotten the help he needed right from the start, Christine Taylor would not have died. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel.